when the worship leader says, oh, I struggle with envy, everyone goes, oh yeah, me too, and then if she were to go, I struggle with pornography, it's like, kick her out of the church, So we have this kind of hierarchy of sins, unfortunately.
Jessica, welcome to the happy hour.
I am so excited to be here, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to have you here, and we are in the middle. I think there's going to be 3 episodes, and I think you're smack dab in the middle. We're in the middle of a series that we're releasing all about pornography, and it feels like, oh, I'm sure my teenagers love that their mom's doing a series on pornography, but you know what? It is what it is. And I will tell you this. I've had your book at my office for a while because it came out in January of this year. So that means I probably got a copy, I don't know, last fall somewhere. And I literally, Jessica, I would look at it all the time and I would think, okay, I want to read this. I want to read this. I want to know what this woman has to say. And I told you before we started recording, I read it over the weekend and I loved it so much. I have already texted 5 people to say you need to get this book and read it. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
Yes. Okay. Introduce yourself to my listener.
Yeah, my name is Jessica Harris, and I am the voice behind beggarsdaughter.com, which is a blog for Christian women who struggle with pornography. So I've been speaking in this space for just over 14 years now.
Oh, I did not know that, Jessica.
Yeah. I've been around for a while.
Yeah, you have.
And it's just been a really neat thing to see the conversation change to where it is now, to even be able to accept a book like the one I wrote. I wrote Quenched, and it released back in January. I am happily married to an Army chaplain, and we have 3 little ones. Just had a baby in May, so 2 girls and a little boy, and loving life. So here we are.
I love it so much. You know, I jokingly said, I'm sure my kids would be, just thrilled that their mom is doing a series on porn. But I'll say this, Jessica, I've written a couple of books now. And in my first book I mentioned pornography. And I said this last week when I interviewed Sam, who is also in the series as well. Let me re-say that, Jason. Jason's mad at her if you hear me talk to him. Let me re-say that real quick. I think I told this to Sam, who also has a show coming out today with the series, is that when I wrote about pornography in that very first book, I had so many women come up to me and they would kind of whisper and they would lean in close and they would say, "This, I've never heard a woman talk about this before." And I remember thinking that putting that chapter in my book, I think it was chapter 9 or whatever, where I had this story about pornography, Jessica, I did not want to put it in. Right. And the reason I didn't want to put it in is because pornography as a woman feels very, very dirty and gross.
Yeah.
And I literally lost sleep over it. And then I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And it's where I had so many women say, thank you for writing about this. So I want to start here. One of the things that you said in your book is you said, and I think that you were talking about when maybe you were in college. I can't remember what was going on when you said this as I listened to the book, but you said, why can't I have a cute stronghold?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Like, why can't I come to the table and be like, guys, I just haven't read my Bible in like 4 days. Like, why is my stronghold pornography? And so I want to start there because I think that women that are listening to this that have or do or whatever struggled with pornography, we think that. Why is this that, God? And so I want to ask you, like, over all these years of being in the space of talking with women about that, what do you encourage women when they come to you and say, like, why does this have to be part of my story? What is this? Like, is there something wrong with me? Because I think as women, we feel like, oh, I must be gross. I must be the lone person. I've never met anyone like this. And when you said that in the book, it really resonated with me because I think that's how women feel.
Right. I think especially church women, right? Especially.
Good clarification. Yes.
We've been raised to have like this image of just being like this ideal Proverbs 31 woman, and then we're in this confessional situation. It's like, yeah, they say I can say anything and I can tell them anything, but I don't think they're really prepared for what I'm going to tell them, and I think I said in the book, or at least in my first book, I say, like, I wanted the Christian Barbie answer, like the church girl answer, the good church girl answer of like, what is it that you're struggling with? Oh, I just don't love Jesus enough. I wanted that one. And there was this level of almost anger of like, why does it have to be this one? And I think if a woman came to me and said that, like, why does this have to be my story? I'm just so mad at God almost for letting this be my story. I think my response to her would be that actually is an effect of shame in her story. Like that is shame that's making you feel like this is such a bigger and different issue. And unfortunately, like shame can come from our cultures too, right? So in some churches, that is the message that we feel when the worship leader says, "Oh, I struggle with envy," everyone goes, "Oh yeah, me too," you know. And then if she were to go, "I struggle with pornography," it's like, kick her out of the church, you know. So we have this kind of hierarchy of sins, unfortunately. But that also is a voice of shame. That's not coming from God. None of that's coming from God. And so when a woman says, "I'm struggling with this, and I wish I was struggling with something cute," God doesn't see any of it as cute, right? Like it's not cute to him. And so that's ultimately who we're striving to be like, who we're striving to connect back into relationship with, and who we're pursuing freedom for, not for all the people around us. And so I would encourage her to switch her perspective in that way, that you might see this as like so much worse than what everyone else is going through, but God does not. He sees it all the same. And I would say that there's so much grace for that woman who is struggling with something deep and dark and is willing to bring it into the light. And she's actually going to experience freedom more than the person who's over here going, "I'm not going to talk about that. I'm only going to talk about my Bible reading." Like you, in wanting to talk about this, are stepping into freedom and stepping into the light.
Shame is just, I feel like Satan is just like, that is his A game. That is like, that is the weapon of choice with so many women, is shame. And I appreciate when I was reading this book, I felt convicted in ways you might not think, but I got convicted in ways that I have spoken about pornography to try to keep people from not wanting to view pornography, and just how that could be a cycle of shame as well. I'll give you an example. It is a true fact that trafficking of individuals and pornography are linked together, right? Like that is not, we're not disputing that. That is a true fact. But I thought about words I've said before, Jessica, about like, well, and again, I'm not someone over here that's never viewed pornography or struggled with it. I have. And so I'm not sitting here as a place of like, how could they? But I found myself going, even thinking like, I don't understand, guys. Don't you know you're contributing to sex trafficking in America? And I heard you talk about that in your book, and that is a form of shame. And so now we have people who like are trapped in this shame, and then we're reinforcing it. I mean, my mind was just blown, and I literally like confessed, like, God, I think I've done this. I think I have contributed to shame. And so it gave me a lot to think about. I've gone way past where I wanted to start this conversation. I want to start this conversation with your story. Sorry, I jumped right in. I'm telling you, I love this book so much. I want to have like a book club conversation. Okay. I want to start with your story, because there's a misconception that pornography is something that only men struggle with. I think in 2023, we're a little bit past that. I think that you would agree with me a little bit. You just told me you've been blogging about this for 14 years. So I think we're true. There is still in Christian circles a misconception that women will struggle with pornography. I want you to tell us a little bit about your story and what that looks like, because I know it's not the same as mine or every listener. There is familiarity in a lot of our stories with pornography. So what is your story with pornography?
Right. So I was exposed to pornography when I was 13. And this is back this is back in the age of dial-up internet and floppy disks, and like Oregon Trail was like the bomb. This is back then. And the internet was really relatively new, and I don't think people understood what was out there on the internet. So I was exposed at 13. This is right in the middle of like what I call the true love waits movement, or purity culture is what we refer to it now. So at the same time that I'm exposed to this content, I'm also hearing nothing from church, basically, other than there's this thing called sex and you're not allowed to have it. And that's kind of the beginning and the end of that conversation. So for me at 13, I get exposed while I'm researching for school, completely innocently. Like I wasn't even researching for health class. Like it wasn't, it was out of left field. Like, and I get exposed to it and I go, oh, this is that, big secret thing that the church isn't talking about, that my family is not talking about. This is it. And in my mind, it seemed like a middle ground, right? So I'm not actually having sex. Like I'm not sleeping with anybody, so I don't have to worry about the whole STD thing or the whole unwanted pregnancy thing. I'll still, be a virgin when I get married. Check that block. But it's like, this is a a safe way for me to explore my sexuality. And that's kind of how it started for me at 13. My mom did catch me early on and was completely freaked out. And as a mom now, like I totally get it, but at the time I'm like, ah, mom, you need to chill. But
Uh-huh.
but she was terrified and didn't know what to do and was like, just tell me you were curious. Just tell me you were curious. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
fine, I was curious, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I just learned how to hide it better, and I continued to use all throughout high school. So my senior year of high school, it was so bad that I was reading erotica on school computers, like during school hours. I would come home from school and I would call my mom at work and let her know I'd be on the internet all afternoon, because back in the day you couldn't be on
Couldn't
the internet
call.
and on the phone. So I let her know I'm going to be on the internet, and so you won't be able to call me, but I'm here. I'm just researching for school, and then I would watch porn for hours. And I think it's helpful for people to understand that, like, I'm talking about real pornography. Like, I'm not talking about reading things online. I did that at school, but at home I was watching like videos and stuff. I think sometimes when women talk about it, they're like, "Oh, it's romance films." No,
Mm-hmm.
no, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. And then my mom would come home and I would have deleted the history and like typed in some websites to make it look like I had researched for school so that she couldn't find anything. And then she would go to bed and the computer was in her room, so I didn't have access anymore. So I would stay up and watch our cable TV. And at that time, if you didn't have a channel, it was like static, and but sometimes like things would slip through. And so I would just like sit up for hours just watching the adult channels that we did not get, waiting for scenes to slip through. So it got to this point where it was just all consuming. Like if I wasn't actively at school, I basically was trying to find a way to be involved in pornography. So um, I my grades started to suffer. I wasn't sleeping a lot, and I thought, okay, I just maybe this has gotten a little out of hand. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
need to rein this in, and I tried to rein it in, and I found out that I couldn't, and so I
Mm-hmm.
felt very stuck as a high school senior, and now I'm searching for help to break free from pornography, and everything
Mm-hmm.
is for men, everything, and that
Mm-hmm.
was when I'm going, oh, oh, maybe this isn't the safe, healthy middle ground that I thought it was. Something wrong with me as a woman for struggling with this. And so I didn't know what to do at that point. I didn't know who to tell. I'm not going to tell my mom. We've already been down that road. I'm not going to tell my
Mm-hmm.
mom. My church is a very conservative, fundamental church. All of the leadership is very old, and their wives are very old. And I'm just like, I'm going to kill somebody. Like, I'm going to walk into the
Mm-hmm.
room and say, like, here I am, the deacon's granddaughter, and I struggle with pornography, and whoever it is going to drop. Like, they're just going to be
Mm-hmm.
gone. So I can't tell them. And I went off to college, Christian college, still struggling. Um, got caught there and was told women don't have this problem, so they knew it couldn't have been me. And that's when I kind of shame just swallowed me, and I gave up
Mm-hmm.
and thought, this is it. If I can't be the good Christian girl who used to be a porn addict, then I don't have a choice but to be the porn star who used to be a Christian. And so there was this switch in my mind of, I'm never going to be able to break free from this, so I might as well just become pornography. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was like the lowest part of my journey, and then God just like miraculously rocked my world kind of. And the next fall I ended up at Bible college, because that's where all aspiring porn stars go. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I that's where the dean staff said, hey, we know some of you women struggle with this and we want to help you. It's a completely different conversation, right?
Yeah.
From women don't have this problem to, hey, we know some women
Mm-hmm.
do and we want to help you. And that's where I was able to make that confession that this is my struggle. And that's where I was able to start stepping forward in freedom. And that's kind of the conversation switch that I've been working over the past 14 years to have happen of, women don't have this problem to, okay, women do have this problem and we want to help
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah. You know, I found it quite interesting that when you got caught the first time in college, at your Christian college, that not only did they say, this can't be you, like that women don't struggle with this, but they literally were like, you must have given your password out to a boy, because this would not be a woman doing this. This would be a boy. And
Right.
you got in trouble for something you hadn't even done. And you went along with it probably because you're like, this is my way out. Like, okay, that's fine. whatever. Like, yes.
I'll sign the paper.
But I just found that
Right.
so interesting, that they even,
Yeah.
they created their own story only because they thought this could not possibly be your struggle.
Right. They had their own little narrative, and it was you had to have given out your password to somebody, and what a horrible sister in Christ you are for doing this. Whoever this is really needs help. And I was like, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we really need to be able to talk to him, but we don't even know who he is because you've, covered for him basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't. It was me.
One of the things I enjoyed so much about your book was you talked about this brokenness that is kind of the deep root of our problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you went a lot throughout your book on Jesus and the woman at the well, and you talk about how we can't shut off access to pornography, but we can cut off necessity. And so, like, what are the deeper roots as to why we are wanting to engage in pornography? And it caused me to stop in my tracks as I was walking and think about it, because there have been, I watched a lot of porn when I was in college in a relationship I was in, and then didn't like watch it at all until literally like this year in 2023 was the first time I had watched porn since like I was in college. So a long time ago. Confessed to a friend, confessed to my husband, all the things. But it got me thinking, what was it that 25 years later, like what was inside of me? And so it was like even the conversation that you had of like, there's things, there's deeper roots inside of us. Can you talk a little bit about that and your journey, if you want to be specific with yourself, of like trying to solve the porn problem? You talk about like we have to go deeper, and I appreciated that, because I'm like, yes, that is so true with every sin in our life, really. Like everything that we're dealing with, there is this deeper. So talk a little bit about what that looked like in your personal life.
Well, one thing I try to encourage parents or churches or whatnot is that so often we just want the behavior to stop, right? We're just like, just stop doing that, and we're not willing to figure out why. And for me, I think what started as just something that I stumbled upon out of curiosity. So like, I think it's important too to understand that it can change, right? So our relationship with something can change. You might have a great relationship with food, but then something happens and it starts to morph and change. Right. So I was introduced to it innocently enough, and I began to explore it innocently enough. Over time, it began to become almost a coping mechanism. I'm a very emotional person. I have been through a lot of trauma in my life. My dad left our family. I was abused by my dad. I was molested by a classmate when I was in elementary school. And so there's learning like healthy coping mechanisms didn't happen for me because I was just running to pornography with things, with my emotions, those things that we should be taking to God. We should be learning how to work through with other people, whatever. Pornography became that emotional crutch for me, if you will. And so almost any emotion would lead me there. Any anger or sadness or stress or loneliness, happiness, joy, all of it would somehow push me right back to it because I just did not know how to function otherwise. So that was it for me. I feel like a lot of people can go to it for a numbing, like an escape, or just to get away from what they're going through. But it's so important to understand what that driving mechanism is. And that's not an excuse. It's not so you can excuse your use, right? It's so that you can find freedom. Because if you don't figure out what's driving you to it, you're going to live your entire life just fighting for freedom, like clawing to keep it away. Whereas if you can figure out where it's coming from and you can get healing into that area, then you live in a sense of freedom. And you might go, this is my weakness here. I know that emotions are my weakness just in general. Like, girl, I got to learn how to like even myself out. But I know that I'm created to be an emotional person. So it's removing some of that shame from that. Like, it's not a bad thing to have emotions. So taking some of that shame away, but also going, I also know that this is, if the devil's going to get me, this is where he's going to get me. He's going to get me in this area of my emotions. And this is where pornography will sneak back in if I'm not careful. And so it's being able to go, this is my weak spot. And whatever that is for you, whether it's like, I've got this trauma in my past that I need to heal up from, but whenever I think about it, man, it starts veering me off course. Or if it's just, oh, I'm so stressed out and this is what I do to relieve stress, or For women, like sometimes certain times of the month, like we're just like, we have hormones and they just try to take over. And if we know what our trigger is, then we're able to walk more effectively in freedom because we know what to look out for. If you don't know what your trigger is, then you're walking around basically paranoid and you're not even able to love God effectively because you're so freaked out and you don't even know how this is going to happen. So understanding kind of your temptation template, if you will, is so helpful in knowing how to walk in freedom.
I love that so much. One of the things you talk about in here that I also found very helpful was about creating boundaries and creating boundaries for ourselves. And even you talking about knowing your temptations, you can know what that is. I mean, we have so many boundaries. Like just on the other episode, you know, Sam Black is on for Covenant Eyes. We have Covenant Eyes. We also have another software what we use at our house. Like we have all these boundaries and things, like no computers in the rooms, and my kids, like I can access their social media. Like, you know, we just put boundaries around ourselves. And yet you said that, I loved it. You said we should create boundaries out of love and not out of fear, out of love for God, out of love for what God wants for us and not out of fear. And I found myself asking myself the boundaries, even if it's not around pornography for me, particularly in my life right now, I found myself asking, man, are you putting boundaries out of fear? For like fear of God, like not a holy fear of God, but like a shame-filled fear, or do you have boundaries out of love? And I found that most of the time in our culture as Christians, especially those of us that grew up in the purity culture, like you mentioned, our boundaries are out of fear. They're not out of love. And how do we switch that? And what does that even look like?
Right. So I think it's really just comes down to, you can have the same boundary, right? So the boundary can still be the same. So let's say it's like, for instance, my husband and I did not kiss until our wedding day. We had our first kiss before we were technically married, but when I knew it wouldn't cause any issues. So, and he would have been fine with kissing me sooner, but I asked for him to wait, not because I was worried what other people would think. That would be a fear motivation. Not because I was worried about what could happen to us. You know, it was more, I know that this is a weakness in my life and I love you. Like I love him and I love God. And I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm tempted to do something that could wound us in that relationship. And so I can put up that boundary and go, I have decided then out of love for you and love for God that I would like us not to kiss until our wedding day. That can be the same boundary, but it's a different motivation than if I go, my mom has said I can't, or the church has said I can't, or other people. I have instead looked at it and gone, out of love for this relationship that I want us to have. And I want us to be able to walk into it without shame and without regrets, and out of love for God and wanting to honor him with my life, and knowing full well that if I start kissing you, that's going to possibly throw me back into pornography, or that's going to raise up so much more temptation that I'm able to deal with right now. Then I am making this choice, and I am making this choice. I'm not putting it in there because someone else told me I needed to. I have made this choice. So I think when you were talking about the boundaries that you have in your house, you know, for instance, like we don't bring computers into the bedroom. That's fine, and it's helpful, especially if that's an area of temptation like for you. But if it's just, well, we just don't want computers in the bedroom because that's what some expert said not to do, and when you haven't sat down and thought about what are we protecting with this boundary here, and is this an area where we're actually tempted, then it's a boundary that's more out of fear. But if you're able to sit down and go, okay, this is my story, this is my struggle, and I want to protect my freedom, I want to protect what is good, and so the way I'm going to protect that is to do X, Y, Z. And it might be the same boundary that someone else has, but your motivation, you're on the inside of the fence versus like the outside of the fence, right? You're looking at what's inside, and you're saying this here around me is beautiful and is good, and I want to protect what is in here, as opposed to that out there is bad and scary and we must erect fences to protect ourselves from it. It's a different strategy for it.
you talk a lot about shame, and I was just with some friends this week, and we were having our yearly retreat, and the counselor said, and I wrote this in the notes that you said in this book as well, and so I was listening to your book on walks while at this retreat with the counselor, and it's like y'all were saying the same thing. I thought it was really cool, but shame sends us into hiding. Like we want to run, we want to run away. We've seen this since Genesis 3, Genesis 2. We want to run away. Shame sends us into hiding, and it got me thinking, Jessica, that even I'm going to be real honest with you, even right now in this moment, when I just said 9 minutes ago that I looked at porn this year, like my heart started beating faster. I got a little sweaty, and I regretted saying it out loud. And I say that to say that I'm feeling shame right now in this moment. And I hate it because I am an advocate for vulnerability, and I'm an advocate for us not looking at women differently, and I'm an advocate for the church standing up and saying, like, how do we love people in the midst of this? And I now am feeling this way, and I hate it. And so my question for you is, how do we become communities and friends and churches who don't promote this cycle of shame that often women, probably, I'm guessing, more than men might feel with a struggle like something with pornography? Like, that's like I feel like that's a loaded question that we could have a 17-week series on. But what does it look like? Like, why am I, a grown woman who is an advocate for vulnerability, choosing to have a series about pornography on my podcast? Why am I feeling shame right now for what I said? Like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do.
Look, I'm getting all kind of sweaty, Jessica. I literally am like, what? And I wrote it in the book, and so I might as well just say it out loud. So, but my point is, I'm feeling shame right now.
Yeah. Well, when you said it, however many minutes ago you did, what I wanted to do, but it didn't quite fit with the context of the conversation, was to respond to you and say that it was very brave for you to say that. And it's brave for you because of all of the reasons that you just listed make you feel the shame. And so, like, it's like shame and brave are like the opposite sides of a coin. And so you're going, I shouldn't do this because I'm an advocate for this, and I all of these things, and that's why I shouldn't be doing this. And that's exactly why it's brave of you to share that it's a struggle, right? Like all of those things, whether you advocate for things or you advocate against them or whatever they are, don't keep us from making choices and making decisions. And what I challenge people all the time with is shame doesn't make people make good choices. It just makes them lie about the bad ones they're making, right? Shame's not a motivator, but it tries to be. Shame's not a protector, but it pretends to be, right? So you're going, I'm an advocate. I do all of these things. And shame's going, that's why you can't tell anybody. That's why you can't tell anybody, because then no one will take this seriously. But it's not protecting you, like by stepping out and stepping forward and saying, like, hey, even though I am all of these things, even though I have written books, even though I speak in Christian circles on this, I still have struggled with this. I had to do that before my wedding because, like, in a moment of sheer panic, like 2 or 3 weeks before my wedding, I'm all of a sudden like, I have no clue how to actually have sex. I've watched pornography for years, but pornography is a horrible sex education teacher. Yep. And then I'm also going, but now I know too much, and I don't want to walk into my marriage going, I know this and I know that, and have my husband going, where'd you learn all that from? He already knew that I had this struggle, but I was like, I don't want that. So what do I do? And then I somehow, in some twisted like series of events, ended up on a porn site like weeks before my wedding. And there was this level of, Jessica, like, you have done this for nearly 10 years at that point. Like, how could you? And I just told my readers, like, on my blog, I was like, this is how I fell to porn before my wedding. And it's super embarrassing almost, because I should have known better. And we don't sin so we can brag about it later, right? Like Paul says, do we keep sinning so that grace can abound? Of course not. But are we perfect? Of course not. And so when we do struggle, I think that that's such a brave thing to share, because it shows people that, man, there aren't any pedestals, right? Where we all struggle with things, and it doesn't matter what platform you've been given, none of us are immune to this. And so it's brave of you, Jamie, to share, hey, this is me too. You could have just left me out high and dry, and like this is the freak over here who used to watch porn, but
No.
you said, hey, like this is part of my story too, and I think we need more of that in our Christian circles. We need less finished stories in our
Mm,
Christian circles and more like unfinished
mm,
stories. And I think growing up in the church, like you always hear about the testimonies, and it's always past tense, right? Like I used to do X, Y, Z, and then poof, Jesus came, and poof,
yeah.
now I'm all better.
Yeah.
And we don't see people walking through that journey. We don't see the struggle. Whereas in the Bible, we
Mm,
see the struggle, right? Like look all throughout the Bible, Abraham struggles, Moses struggles,
yeah.
David struggles, Paul struggles, like all of them,
Mm-hmm.
Peter,
Yeah. Yeah.
Peter struggles. Like, and we see that struggle and we look at the Bible and we go, well, isn't this amazing? We see God working through all of this and we see how he uses all of this. But then in our Christian circles, we kind of just like want the polished end
Mm,
game, and we don't want to hear about all of that dirty
yeah.
stuff, and we don't want to hear about
Yeah.
all of the grit and the struggle in the middle. And so I think just being willing to have more of those
Mm,
conversations and not being afraid of them, and
yeah.
not going, oh, you're the pastor's wife or you're the worship leader, but
Yep.
going, wow, even the pastor's wife or even the
Yeah.
worship leader can struggle
Yeah.
with this.
I remember when I don't remember where I wrote about this in one books, but I talked about this thing called sin shock. And it is
Right.
that shock of like, oh wow, I can't this shock that says, oh wow, I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe you struggle with that, or I can't believe you would say that. And as much as I don't want to be that way, I find myself doing that some. One of the things that you said in here, and this is what I would like to talk about as well, or a question that I had for you, is how do we talk about the dangers of pornography without shaming people? And I think that was where I kind of got a little convicted. Like I told you that some of the things that we might say to maybe discourage porn use or even to advocate against the porn industry. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to advocate about an industry that is doing so much damage to our world. How do we do those things without at the same time shaming people who are stuck in maybe an addiction to pornography or who dabble in pornography, or however you want to say it? How do we do both? Like, how do we help people? How do we talk about an industry that is very, very damaging and not shame people?
Right. So this is a strategy that
Wave
I
your
also
magic
tell,
wand and tell
right?
us how to do
I wish.
this.
This is a strategy that I also give to parents, right? And so it's helpful to just like, we'll talk about kids for a moment here.
Yeah.
So let's say you find out that your 7-year-old is watching pornography. Like they got your iPad out, they found it, they were
Which I want to
introduced to it
stop
at
you right
school.
here.
Yeah.
I want to stop you, Jessica, because there's some people that are like, okay, 7, give me a break. And I just want everyone to know that you can probably give us a real stat, but the average age of exposure to pornography is what?
Between 9 and 10.
Okay, there you go.
That's the
So
average age. So like understand that
exactly.
like for every
Uh-huh.
13-year-old that sees it, there's like a 5-year-old, right? And so we're hearing stories of kids, whenever you give your child something electronic, an
Yep.
iPad or an iPhone,
Uh-huh.
you are giving them access to pornography. And
Yeah.
I know parents are like, I am not, but you are. Like you actually
Which
are.
I always say it's not if your kid's exposed, it's when. And
Yeah.
the first time one of my children was exposed to pornography, they were super young, and it was on someone else's phone that they had their parents' phone.
Right.
And we were in a
Right.
public place. They weren't away in a corner. We were in a public place. This other kid had their
Mhm.
parents' phone, and my kid was exposed to pornography.
Right.
Okay, I just want to get that
So,
straight. Carry on.
so let's say that happens. So you're the mom, you walk in, your 7-year-old is watching pornography, and your initial reaction, and I get it because I'm a mom, would be to like, oh my goodness, for all
What
of
in
the
the
things that we
actual
have, right?
HE double hockey sticks is happening?
For all of the things that we have done, all of the ways that I have tried, and let's be honest, like no matter who you are, no matter your gender, pornography has affected your story somehow. Either you've struggled with
Mm,
it, or you have a family member who struggled with it. You have a friend who struggled with it, or a friend's husband, like whatever it is.
yeah.
You have seen its effects, and so you carry all of that into how you parent or into how you relate with other people. So you walk into the room and your kid's watching porn, and I've seen this even recently with parents reaching out to colleagues of mine who work more with parents and kids, and they say, I can't believe my innocent little boy is
Mm,
doing. And we begin to shame. Why? Because we're labeling the person as opposed to the action. And so I tell parents, view porn as the predator, and it's not some evil wicked thing that your child is doing. It is
mm,
a predator that is starting to creep up on your child. Like if you're out at the playground with your kids
Mm-hmm.
and some creepy guy comes weaseling in from the corner, you're not going to yell at your child, right? You're going to be
Right.
intervening. You're going to be
Oh, that's
getting
good.
up there
Yeah.
and going like, you step off, like you get back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to carry that same mindset up into church culture and into the adults that we know, because let's be honest, especially like I work with teenagers and young adults, they are hearing that this is safe. They're hearing that this is good. They're hearing that this is healthy. Everyone around them is watching porn. Like, why shouldn't they be watching porn? And when we come screaming in with this message of this promotes human trafficking, which it does, like it's connected, and I'm not discounting that at all. But what we unintentionally do is we make it sound like, and you're a human trafficker, you know. Or back in the day, it was a lot of serial killer stuff. Like serial killers, all they have in common is watching pornography. And so when you're sitting in church, you're like, oh, great. Am I like destined to be a serial killer now?
Right.
Like what's happening here?
Yeah.
And what we need to do is kind of have that same wanting to intervene of the person watching pornography is not the enemy here. And I think a lot of our messaging can look like that. It's like an us versus them. It's like the people who don't struggle with porn versus all the people who do. And that's not it. It's an industry. It's a weapon of the enemy. It is it's a predator, and it has sunk its teeth into so many people in the church. And when we start to view them as people that need to be liberated and captives that need to be set free, we can have that shift where we can still have the message of that is human trafficking. That is not good. And I know you, person, have been sold a lie, and you've believed all of these things because no one's telling you the truth about this. And I know it's hard, person that I am talking to, that to feel like you can break free, but there is grace for you. And if you want freedom, we can work on this together. And really intervening and dealing with the person and wanting to free them, just like you would if you saw somebody, you know, creeping up on your kid at the playground. You wouldn't yell at your child. You would be doing something to stop and to separate them, and you wouldn't be shaming your child for this person creeping up on them. And so I think in the church we need to have that mindset. Yes, this is wrong, and yes, this contributes to a lot of not so great things in society, but I can guarantee you that when a young woman is watching it, that's not her goal, right? And so when we start to label, oh, here, you know, it's human trafficking and it's exploitation, now we're just like heaping shame on her when she could be a victim of exploitation herself. There are some women who have suffered sexual trauma, and they turn to pornography as a way to try to reconcile and try to normalize it. And they're trying to cope because they can't find another way to cope with it. And instead of figuring out what damage has been done to them, we're going, oh, you're part of sexual exploitation. And they're going, but I was the one. And it just starts to heap shame and just drive them further into hiding.
You know, I'm just going to say right now, you have saved right now a lot of little children from some shame, because a mom is going to remember what you just said, because there is going to be that moment that she finds out that her child is either watching porn in their house or has seen porn or whatever. And honestly, there's something inside of us that our first reaction is like, what is wrong with you? Like, why would you do this? And you have literally just given moms and dads as well, but most people listen to my show are moms. You've just given moms this tool of saying that don't get onto your child for being bad, but there was a predator that came after them from the internet. And I'm telling you, women are like, it makes sense. I got chills when you said it, Jessica, because I did not have a good reaction the very first time that we encountered this. And it's like a regret of mine, but you can't go back. You can only go forward. But that is so good that is something coming for your child. That's not your child going for it. Now, can we go a little bit further? Can we go into adulthood? What does it look like to have conversations? Like, let's say that's not a 7-year-old, but I'm thinking of like students, like youth minister, or even college kids. Your experience was just so terrible of trying to let anyone know that you had a struggle that you need help with and no one would listen. What does it look like? How do we talk about the danger of pornography without shaming when we're talking about with adults? Like, what would that have looked like when you were at that college and they stood up and they said, we know some of you women in here struggle with this. Why was that experience so much better? Like, I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do we not shame people and still talk about the dangers of pornography? And I mean adults now, not kids.
Yeah. So I think you have to make it, excuse me, you need to make it maybe not two separate conversations, but two separate parts of a conversation. And so you
Okay. Uh-huh.
can say, this is what's going on with pornography. And this is, this is why it's dangerous. This is why it can rip marriages apart. It can, destroy families, whatever. But if you're somebody who's struggling with this, like it's a liar, right? Like the Satan is the father of lies, right? And so pornography is not presenting itself as this like evil, sinister, bad thing. And
Right.
people enjoy it. And so being able to go, I get it that you think it's fun. I get it that you think it has a place in your marriage. It doesn't. But I get it that you think that all of these things. Let me tell you about what's going on with pornography. And now let's talk about what it could be doing to you. Because remember, the pornography is the bad guy. And so if I want to say pornography promotes sexual exploitation, pornography promotes human trafficking, I can also personalize this and say, and pornography is a horrible sex education teacher. It is not going to teach you healthy views about sex. It's going to wound your image of yourself. It's going to affect your body image. It's going to affect how you view relationships. It's going to affect how you view intimacy. It's going to affect a lot of things. So let's talk about you and how we can heal that and how God wants to heal that and God wants to free you from that. And I think a lot of this is wrong about pornography conversations are really, this is what's wrong, and so this is why you should stop it. And I think we need to split that and say, this is what's wrong, and that's why God wants to free you. Right? This is what's wrong, and that's why it's wounding you. And you might not realize that it's hurting you, but God wants to set you free from it. It's not zip up your pants and stop it. It is, listen, Jesus wants to come and set you free. He's fought for your freedom. He's fighting for your freedom. And he wants you to walk in victory. Plus he wants you to heal whatever damage led you to this and whatever damage has been caused by this. And so I think you're still able to frame kind of like pornography as the bad guy while still talking to people who are struggling with this. Like, you need to stop because it's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for culture. It's not healthy for others. But you also need to understand what's leading you there and what needs to heal. And we need Jesus. We need Jesus in here. We need grace in here. And we got to help you find freedom. I think that was the difference between the school that was like, women don't do this, to the one that said, we know some of you do, and we want to help you. And the very first study I did was actually John 4, as part of that freedom process. And it was just talking about how we look for other waters that don't satisfy. And so it was a conversation more about what was drawing me to it and what was broken in me that was leading me there. Because I think the people who want to break free from pornography know that it's not the best. Like, they have heard that message. So they've heard this isn't great. And now they're like, now what do I do? Like, now how do I get out?
Yeah.
And we need to have that answer in there too.
You say in your book, you talk about, and this is what you're kind of talking about, like our truly greatest need is Jesus. Like, he is our greatest need that is going to help us with these things. And by no means did I get the tone in the book or the tone in our conversation now that you are having this idea of like, just slap some Jesus on it and everything's fine. Like, you're just, just like, that's going to solve although Jesus does solve all the problems. I didn't get the sense that you're like, oh, you just need Jesus and he'll be fine. Like, you got the sense that like, you need Jesus because there's roots inside of you that need that living water that cannot be given water any other way. And that's going to help you fight this. And I really appreciated that. Jessica, I want to ask you this. There are people who are listening here today, I guarantee you this is happening, that have never, ever told anyone about their struggle. They feel the shame. Maybe they have got it under control for a little bit and then it comes back and they fight it and they feel shame and they don't tell anybody. What is your encouragement to that listener who has never told anyone about their struggle with pornography?
My encouragement to them would be that shame thrives in silence, right? And sin loves secrets. So if you want to begin your journey of freedom, or even if you felt like you've fallen back in and are trying to claw your way out, that your best first step is to tell somebody. And I know that it's terrifying because I've done that, right? Like, I've done that. I've told somebody. I've had to kind of take off that mask, because again, shame it pretends to protect us. And so when we are starting to call it out and saying, actually, I'm going to go ahead and put myself out there, you'll feel almost an increase of shame. And you go, is it really worth it to step out and say this? Should I wait maybe until I have it more under control? I really would like it just to be an old story, not a current story. We kind of start working through that. Your journey of freedom is less about fighting pornography and more about fighting shame. And I think that there is so much power in breaking open that wall and like letting the light come into this area of our lives. And so I encourage people to tell somebody. I know that's scary. I know it's terrifying. I know it might make you feel like you're going to throw up or pass out or whatever, but be willing to find someone safe. And if you don't have someone safe, then start praying for someone safe, because we all need somebody that's that safe. And say, hey, this is what's going on in my life. I'm not expecting you to fix it. I'm not expecting you to know what to do with it. I'm not expecting you to like toss me to a counselor. I just need to be able to be seen in this struggle and met with grace. And I know it might shock you. You might need a minute. That sin shock that you were talking about. I tell people, shocked is not the same as shame. Like, it's okay if something like takes us off guard or startles us, but be willing to say, hey, this is my story. I want to tell you how this has affected my life and how this has gotten into my life. And this is when I was exposed. Like, be willing to share your story with somebody with the intent of having them receive it in a gracious way. You're not asking them to fix it. You're not asking them to do anything about it. You just want to have that conversation out there and not be hiding anymore. I think you'll find almost a bit of pressure is released when that happens. And that's the first step I encourage anybody with. Some people say get an accountability partner, but I just tell somebody, because we're supposed to be in community, right? We're supposed to be doing life together. And there's an element of that needs honesty and vulnerability and transparency.
Yeah. And it almost just feels like there's a little bit of a, you talk about that secrets, and there's a little bit of like, there's relief almost. And like, I'm just going to say this out loud, and I need a human to look me in the eyes and like maybe hold my hands, maybe give me a hug. There's just something that defeats the shame so much when you can just say it. Like you just get it out, like instead of that secret. It's so good. I know that there are people who are listening who are probably like, how can I get more of Jessica? Like, where can I get more of her in my life? So you have a blog. Is that like the best place for them to reach you and find out more about your writings?
Yes, probably. Blog or Instagram seems to be like the things right now. So beggarsdaughter.com is my blog, and there's hundreds of posts on there from all throughout my journey and addressing different questions that have been sent in by readers and such. And then Instagram is Beggar's Daughter.
Where did Beggar's Daughter come from?
Yeah, so when I was going to start my blog back in the day, I've always been a poet at heart. Ever since I was little, I've loved poetry and symbolic things. And so I wanted a blog name that was beautiful, in my opinion, and communicated the struggle that women are facing. And so as I'm trying to, and that wasn't like Purity After Pornography, which was that was the first title for it. But a woman that I used to mentor when I was in college. So after I finished my finding my freedom, I was mentoring some teen girls, and one of them wrote a poem about that was entitled Beggar's Daughter, and it was about a beggar in London who would look up and dream about the castle and dream about what it would be like to live in the castle. And people around her told her, you were born a beggar, you will die a beggar. Like, just stop dreaming about being at the castle. And yet she would still like long for that. And I just was like, that's it. That is it. That is how you feel when you're in the midst of this struggle. I'm like, man, I have screwed up. This is my identity. And people say like, you're stuck. Like, you are never getting out of this. You are messed up. Because even like the purity culture hangover kind of is, even after you've gotten free from pornography, well, now you're like tainted goods and now you're no good. And it just like snowballs and it becomes this thing that never goes away. And these women who long for freedom and want a different identity. And it was like, this is it. This is beggar's daughter. It was like that's what they feel like. They feel like beggars and that they're owned by that, but they're a daughter of God ultimately, like of the Most High King. And so that's where that name came from, and it's just stayed throughout the years. It's become a thing. I went to a conference once and I got in the van from the airport, and someone looked at me and went, "Oh, you're a beggar's daughter," like it was like a stage name or something.
Yeah.
So there's no changing it now. There's no going back.
You're stuck with it. That is for sure. Well, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this book, Quenched. You guys, you can get it. It's out. It's been out since January. Discovering God's abundant grace for women struggling with pornography and sexual shame. Jessica, thank you for your work here. I'd love to hear from you. What are you reading these days?
I am reading a book called Create Anyway by Ashley Gadd, and it is about finding moments for creativity in the throes of motherhood. So obviously I have 3, 4 and under, and have somehow managed to write a book in that time. But there's been many times where I've gone, maybe this isn't the right time for that. Like maybe I need to put all of that on hold and just throw myself into mothering. And she just makes the argument for like, God created us to be creative people. He is a creator, and he created us to create, and it's not a separate calling from motherhood, that we can invite our kids into this process, and that we can honor God by doing things like calligraphy, or I love to glaze pottery, and so like that can be a way to bring honor and glory to God, and it's not frivolous, and it's not unnecessary. It's an act of worship. And so I just have been so encouraged by it and love it. It's a good book.
I love that so much. Well, Jessica, thanks for coming on the Happy Hour.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey friends, I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. To make sure that you never miss any of the Happy Hour conversations, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below to make sure you're notified every time we release a new episode. And if you want more content today, click on those videos over there. I think you're going to like them just as much as you like the one today.